All right, hello everybody. We're going to do the last topic here in Unit 2 of AP Bio, which is going to be on the endosymbiotic theory. So kind of big picture, kind of the key takeaways we want to take away from today is first, we want to know the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. We want to learn how eukaryotic cells evolved from prokaryotic cells, and then talk about some of the evidence that supports this theory of how eukaryotic cells came from prokaryotic. So those are going to be the main topics for today. So let's start at the beginning. There are two types of major cells that you are responsible for knowing in this class. We have the prokaryotic and the eukaryotic. So here's a nice table that kind of organizes all the differences between them. Highly recommend you get this table down in your notes if you don't print it, because it just does a really good job of kind of summarizing it up. So if we look at the prokaryote and eukaryote, we notice first that the nucleus, eukaryotes have one, prokaryotes do not. Their DNA just kind of free floats in the cytoplasm, while the eukaryotes have their DNA focused in that nucleus. Energy source. Prokaryotes have a couple. Mostly they do chemosynthesis, which is they break down energy-rich molecules in their outer membrane. And sometimes they can do photosynthesis. This is more rare. Typically, it's going to be chemosynthesis. In eukaryotes, there are two different types, depending if you're an animal or a plant. But animals will do cellular respiration. So they break down glucose in order to generate energy. Plants do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Plants will do photosynthesis to store the energy, and then cellular respiration to then break down those sugars that they stored through photosynthesis. Compartmentalization. What this means is, do the cells have specific organelles for specific functions? In prokaryotics, this is mostly no. They don't have organelles. They don't have specific functions to different types of organelles. Eukaryotes do. And we talked about that earlier in Unit 2. Things like ribosomes, rough ER, the nucleus, mitochondria, etc. Typically, when you look at the size, comparatively, prokaryotes are much smaller than eukaryotes. That's why we have the star here, because it's all comparative. Obviously, eukaryotic cells are still very small. You are made up of eukaryotic cells, being a eukaryote, but still, compared to prokaryotes, eukaryotic cells are typically going to be much larger. So number of cells, typically prokaryotes are unicellular, so they're just one-celled organisms. Think of like bacteria and stuff like that. While eukaryotic are typically found in multicellular organisms, so like us, humans. Now, they do have some similarities, which is evidence for evolution, and we'll talk more about that later on. But some of the structures they do have in common include ribosomes, DNA, cell membranes, cytoplasm. Some of these very, very basic organelles, which are essential for creating proteins and things like that, are found in both cells. All right, so the current theory of where eukaryotic cells came from is from this endosymbiotic theory. So since prokaryotes are considered simpler in terms of their cellular makeup, it is largely believed that prokaryotes came first, and then eukaryotes evolved from them. One of the leading theories on this is the endosymbiotic theory, in which we think an ancestral prokaryote, which you can see here, all right, evolved the trait of having enfolded plasma membrane. So we have the cell membrane on the outside, and it, through genetic mutations, eventually started to form more and more inner channels through those cell membranes. Think of it kind of like a maze forming on the inside with cell membranes as the wall. This would have been an advantage in the early prokaryotes because it would have gave them more room for chemical reactions. So you have more proteins allowing things in and out, more areas in order to break down chemicals for chemosynthesis. So over time, these early prokaryotes with the enfolding would have been selected for in certain environments. Now, in these enfoldings, you started to design some of the earliest organelles. So here we have like the nucleus. And then in some of them, it could even take in other prokaryotes. So we had a big prokaryotic organism here, and it started to take in other ones, things like cyanobacterium, which is bacteria that does photosynthesis, or aerobic bacterium, which are organisms that do cellular respiration. And this would have been an example of a symbiotic relationship in which this big prokaryote took in other smaller ones, and they performed their own function, providing energy for the big prokaryote. The big prokaryote most likely provided protection for these smaller ones. And then over time, these smaller prokaryotic organisms became integrated into the cell. until they were just part of the organism as a whole. And this would have been the first ancestral eukaryotic organism, which would have evolved with more complexity over time. So what are some evidence for this theory? Well, the first one is that mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own inner cell membrane. They are double membraned, which is unique to only a few organelles, just like the original prokaryotic organisms. So you can imagine you have this outer membrane, which is normal for an organelle to have, like a nucleus. But within that membrane, it has even another membrane, which is probably the original one from the prokaryotic ancestor and just stayed over time. Second, the DNA and RNA has the same structure in prokaryotes and mitochondria in that it's both circular. Mitochondria has their own DNA, separate from the 46 chromosomes that you typically think of for humans. It's got its own DNA, it's got its own ribosomes, it does all of its own protein synthesis, completely separate from the rest of the cell. And the DNA and RNA in here is circular, just like a prokaryotic organism. And then finally, like I just said about 30 seconds ago, mitochondria and chloroplasts make their own proteins and have their own ribosomes, similar to that to prokaryotic organisms. So they're not dependent on DNA that's in the nucleus. They have their own set of stuff, and then they produce all of the proteins that are necessary for them to do energy synthesis or break down glucose into a usable energy form. Okay, so that is it for Unit 2. Make sure you understand the differences between the cells, how the endosymbiotic theory works and what it explains, and then what is the evidence for it. That'll be it for today. No FRQ because it was a real short lecture today, and I will see you all tomorrow.